It's April 11th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with South Korea's 22nd general elections. The main opposition Democratic Party secured a safe majority in the National Assembly, winning 161 out of 254 directly contested seats. The ruling People Power Party won 90 seats. And we head straight over to the National Assembly to get the latest election updates. We also have an expert analysis of what the election results mean for this country. At the Biden-Kishida summit in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, U.S. President Joe Biden for the first time says he backs Japan's outreach to North Korea and that he's still open to talks with the regime's leader, Kim Jong-un. Most of the ballots for 22nd general election of South Korea have been counted by now, with the makeup of the new parliament taking shape. Our National Assembly correspondent Ishu explains a breakdown of the 300 seats.
It's been a gripping night with people and the lawmaker candidates closely watching the results of the ballot count slowly take shape. By 7 a.m. on Thursday, 99.8% of the ballots deciding local district representatives were counted. According to national broadcaster KBS, out of 254 possible seats representing local districts, the main opposition Democratic Party of Korea took 161, the ruling People Power Party 90, while there was one seat each for the minor Saemildae, New Reform, and Jimbo parties. As for the 46 proportional representation seats, with 97.6% of the ballots counted by 7 a.m., the PPP satellite People Future Party secures 16 seats, while the DP satellite party, the Democratic United Party of Korea, including candidates from the Jimbo party, secure 12. From minor camps, the Rebuilding Korea Party, launched by former Justice Minister Cho Guk, won 11 seats, while the New Reform Party, led by the former PPP leader Lee Jun-seok, won 1. This means that in total, the DP and its satellite occupy more than the majority of the new assembly, with 173 seats. That's 58.8% of all seats in the parliament. Moving forward, the DP may have additional support in parliamentary procedures from 13 other minor opposition lawmakers elected, representing the Saemildae, Rebuilding Korea, and Jimbo parties. Meanwhile, the PPP and its satellite will occupy a total of 106 seats. That's 36.1% of overall representation. The PPP may have support in parliament from 2 representatives elected from the New Reform Party. The DP won in many of the capital districts, taking victory in several key battlegrounds along the so-called Hangang River Belt. Traditionally liberal Jeolla-do provinces and traditionally battleground Chungcheongdo province voted in favor of the main opposition. Meanwhile, the PPP won fewer seats in the capital region but did secure traditionally conservative districts in Gangnam-gu. Historically conservative Gyeongsang-do province also voted mostly in favor of the ruling party. This distribution isn't vastly different from the previous 21st Assembly elected 4 years ago. As we've seen in the previous large opposition small ruling parliament, the opposition now has the opportunity to take control of parliamentary moves with its numbers, leaving the Yoon administration without the momentum needed to push through its objectives. Lee Si-hu, Arirang News.
Let's find out more about the situation with the ruling and main opposition parties. We go straight to our correspondent Shin Ha-young, who has been following it all at the National Assembly. Ha-young, were there any updates for the DP over the night?
Good morning, Dami. I'm currently at the National Assembly, close to where the ruling and main opposition parties operated their headquarters yesterday. And following cheers and applause regarding the exit polls yesterday, there weren't any new official remarks from the main opposition Democratic Party so far regarding the overall vote count throughout the night, other than the DP leader Lee Jae-myung, who is also the co-chair of the election campaign committee, saying that he would watch the results until the end. However, regarding his victory in Incheon's Gaeangbi district, there were some remarks from him. He said that the voters' choice is a judgment of the government and an act of giving the DP and him the responsibility to create a better world by taking responsibility for people's livelihoods issues. And meanwhile, the DP's election campaign committee is scheduled to convene a meeting on Thursday at 10 a.m. to deliver an official message about the 22nd general election.
Right, and I'm sure things are looking quite different for the PPP. How are they taking it?
Well, Tommy, there haven't been any official comments so far from the ruling People Power Party since before its interim leader Han Dong-un left the headquarters yesterday, where he said that despite the party's efforts to do politics that follows the people's will, the exit polls are disappointing. And instead, there will be an official announcement from Han at 11 a.m. today. And in the meantime, one official from the PPP's election campaign committee said it's quite shocking to see such results despite the best efforts from each regional candidate and Han, while raising concerns over dominance in the legislature. And with the PPP failing to secure the majority of the National Assembly seats, further conflict is expected, with the opposition party pushing various bills by designating them as fast-track bills and the president exercising his veto power for the remainder of his term. And that's all I have for this hour, and I'll have more updates for the later newscast. Back to you, Dami.
All right, our correspondent Shinayong live from the National Assembly. Thank you. And this year's election saw the highest participation rate in more than 3 decades. Now, encouragement for early voting was behind the record figure. Pansy reports.
The voter turnout rate for this year's election was 67%. According to the National Election Commission, out of about 44 million eligible voters, nearly 30 million Koreans have cast their ballots at polling stations nationwide to elect 300 lawmakers at the National Assembly. This is the highest figure in 32 years since 1992, when 70% voter turnout was recorded. In fact, the turnout for early voting, which took place last week from Friday to Saturday, reached 31.28%. Marking the highest early voting turnout for general elections since it was first implemented in 2014. Almost half of the early voters were those in their 50s and 60s, followed by those in their 40s and 70s. This comes after the ruling party and the main opposition party leaders have repeatedly urged voters to cast their ballots.
Consolidation of support from a conservative party and a progressive party, that too is reflected in the voter turnout. It seems that it was important which side went out to vote more.
The high voter turnout also comes after the country decided to disclose the real-time status of early voting ballot boxes to the public using CCTV cameras, further encouraging voters to cast their ballots. 배은지, Arirang News.
So the DP retains a majority in the National Assembly. Now, what does this indicate for the next 4 years? We're joined by Professor Min Jung-woo this morning. Welcome.
Good morning.
So let's start with the voter turnout, which came to 67%. What's your take on this?
Well, as you mentioned, the turnout of this general election is 16%. And generally speaking, the voter turnout of the general election in South Korea is a little bit lower than that of the president elections.
Right.
For example, the turnout of the president election in 2022 was the 77.1%. So we can see that the voter turnout in general elections is about the 10% difference, or the lower than the president elections in recent years. Anyway, the voter turnout of the general election this time is the highest general election turnout since 1992, and it's higher than the 4 years ago by 0.8%. And as you mentioned in the briefing, the turnout of the early voting this time is 31.3%, and it's 4.6% higher than the 4 years ago. So it seems that the increase of the early voting mainly contributed to the higher voter turnout of this general election. And the higher voter turnout this time reflects that South Korean voters got higher interest getting involved in the national politics this time.
Definitely. Then we now have to talk about the election results. What are you reading into this resounding victory that the South Korean people handed to the DP?
Well, the outcome of the general election shows that South Korean voters supported the opposition parties much more than ruling party. And the main opposition Democratic Party will take the 174 out of the 300 seats in total, while the ruling party will just take the 109 out of 300 seats. And more importantly, the opposition bloc will take 188 out of the 300 seats, and which included the Rebuilding Korea Party, whose leader is Jo-guk, the former Secretary of the Justice Department in the previous administration. And the party is expected to receive 12 proportional seats. So it shows that this general election is a typical of the midterm elections, which is held in the middle of the current administration, and its main feature is voters' assessments of the current administration and the ruling party. So the outcome of this general election suggests that South Korean people did not like the past performance of the current administration and the ruling party, and sent a strong signal to the presidential office and the ruling party that it needed to take more care of what South Korean people want,
right,
and to do better for the rest of its terms.
Definitely. Now, analyzing the results, let's dissect it by region. Now, any regions or areas of the country that surprised you personally?
Well, we need to take care of, pay attention to the results of the Seoul and the Gyeonggi province, metropolitan areas, and also the Daejeon and Chungcheong,
right,
the provinces. Because first, it has been known that Seoul and Gyeonggi province, which over half of the total voters in the country live in, have had significant impacts on the overall outcome of the South Korean general elections. And that trend is also applied to the results of this general election. And the main opposition party received much more votes than the ruling party in Seoul and Gyeonggi province this time too. And along with the vote decisions in the Seoul and Gyeonggi province, it is also important to consider, as you mentioned, the vote decisions in the Daejeon and Chungcheong, which are located in the middle of the country, and they have been considered as the casting votes in national elections in South Korea. And their votes show well how South Korean voters perceive the national conditions of the election. And this time, in most congressional districts in the region, the main opposition party, Democratic Party candidates, defeated their opponents, ruling party candidates. So, and it is also contributed to the victory of the opposition party this time.
Professor Min, then I have to ask you, how will or what the election results, what kind of changes will bring to the state affairs, especially for the Yoon administration?
Well, basically, in terms of the victory of the opposition party, it could be more challenging for the current administration to implement domestic politics. And the opposition Democratic Party will have bigger voice in implementing domestic policies based on the victory of this general election. It means that it would be harder for the current administration and ruling party to pass legislations in the National Assembly because the opposition bloc has got the supermajority in Congress. So we may see more situations that the ruling party and opposition parties will make negotiations to pass legislations, but the lead will be taken by the opposition party. It means that the National Assembly will be dominated by the opposition bloc for the upcoming 4 years.
So we should expect more talks and negotiations between the two. Yes. Now, what are some immediate economic policy measures that we should expect the DP to press ahead with now that they've won?
Well, basically the economic policies are mainly implemented by the executive branch, like the presidential office and the financial departments, not by the National Assembly. So I don't think that there will be the significant or the immediate economic policy shifts or changes in the coming months. Instead, the current administration will maintain its economic policy orientations for the rest of the year. But when the executive branch and the National Assembly will talk about economic policies the next year in terms of negotiating the national budget, then we may see more progressive policies could be considered. But it's not clear at this point how much they are willing to negotiate and cooperate to pass legislations next year because there will be the political disputes and the conflicts between the two major parties.
Definitely. Professor Min, before I let you go briefly, what about on the diplomatic front? Will there be a major shift in policy directions?
Well, like the economic policies, I don't think that there will be a major shift in the diplomatic policies directions in the coming years, because like the economic policies, diplomacy and foreign policies will mainly be made and implemented by the executive branch, like the Presidential Office and Department of Foreign Affairs. And the public opinion polls have shown that foreign policy is one of the areas that the current administration is particularly assessed by the public, South Korean, the public. So there will be a little change in terms of the implementing foreign policy, and foreign elections in the coming years. So the current administration will maintain its foreign policy directions like the strengthening the ROK-US alliance, the improving trilateral cooperation among South Korea, US, and Japan, and the enhancing cooperation with the like-minded countries like the European nations, European unions, Canada, and Australia, something like that.
Right, they should be more on the same page on that in the field of diplomacy. Yeah. All right, Professor Min, thank you so much for your insights this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And this year's election also appears to be of great interest in countries around the world, with multiple outlets reporting on how the election results will set the tone for the rest of the president's term. Chim reports.
The parliamentary elections have received a great deal of attention beyond South Korea's own borders. Foreign media outlets have highlighted that Wednesday's election is a crucial test for President Yoon. After the polls closed at 6 p.m., the New York Times reported that the president is facing the threat of being a lame duck for the remaining 3 years in office. One expert told the Associated Press that Yoon, who has been grappling with low approval ratings, would find it difficult to move forward even a single step on state affairs. Another expert told Reuters that this election is a retrospective of the president's performance, rather than a choice about future policy issues. Several foreign media outlets, including the British newspaper The Guardian, highlighted what's been dubbed as the Green Onion outcry, which ignited voter anger in South Korea. Sources reported that the president and his party felt the heat after visiting a supermarket last month with the intention of promoting government efforts to lift financial pressures. Yoon had said less than $1 for a bundle of green onions is a reasonable price when the actual retail price is 3 or 4 times more. Foreign media outlets said that this made the president appear out of touch amid a lack of real progress to stabilize prices and livelihoods. Corruption allegations have also been a topic of interest overseas. Reuters and Al Jazeera underlined the Dior bag scandal involving the accusation that First Lady Kim broke the law by accepting a Dior bag as a gift. Reuters also mentioned that Yoon faced a backlash after appointing former Defense Minister Lee Jong-seop as the country's ambassador to Australia, while Lee was under a corruption probe. Meanwhile, Al Jazeera has pointed out that the main opposition Democratic Party is not free from such issues, with the party's chairman Lee Jae-myung facing corruption charges. And despite escalating tensions on the Korean peninsula, Reuters and AFP reported that North Korea is not a major issue in the election. Reuters said little change is expected in the diplomatic arena, whatever the result. Chim, Arirang News.
지정학적 갈등이 심화되고 있는 현 국제 정세 가운데에서 우리나라 동포들이 느끼고 있는 불안감이 상당히 큽니다. 이러한 불안감이 조금이라도 덜어지는 사회 분위기를 형성하는데 일조해 주실 것으로 기대합니다.
스웨덴에 살면서 행복하게 뛰어노는 아이들과 가족들을 많이 보게 되는데요. 한국 사회에도 이러한 가족들이 많아질 수 있도록 부모 간에 평등하게 아이를 책임질 수 있는 사회와 아이들이 충분히 넉넉하게 행복할 수 있는 환경을 위해 노력해 주셨으면 좋겠습니다.
분열이 발생하고 갈등이 이전보다 더 격해진 것 같습니다. 특정 집단이나 특정 인물이 아닌 국민 모두를 위한 국회가 되었으면 좋겠습니다.
대도시가 아닌 지역에 거주하는 제 국민들은 투표 하나를 하기 위해서 큰 돈 혹은 시간을 써서 그 투표소에 가서 이제 투표를 해야 하는 고충이 있습니다. 투표소가 더 많이 만들어졌으면 좋겠다라는 생각을 하고 또한 제 국민이 투표를 하려면은 사전 신청을 해야 되는데 이러한 면들이 더 많이 홍보가 되었으면 좋겠습니다.
한국에서 합법적으로 외국인 근로자로 취업할 수 있는 법적 근거를 만들어 주시면 좋겠습니다. 또한 이주 여성들이 조금 더 전문적인 일자리에 예를 들어 심리상담사, 이주 여성 동료 심리상담사 같은 일자리에 진출할 수 있는 기반을 만들어 주시면 좋겠습니다.
U.S. President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida reaffirmed their commitment to work together on denuclearizing North Korea. Also, for the first time, Biden showed his support for Japan's outreach to the North. Lee Seung-jae has more.
U.S. President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida met for a summit at the White House on Wednesday, where the two leaders discussed an array of issues related to North Korea. In the joint statement issued after the talks, Biden and Kishida reaffirmed their commitment to the complete denuclearization of North Korea in accordance with relevant UNSC resolutions, while also condemning North Korea's continued development of its ballistic missile program, including through launches of intercontinental ballistic missiles and space launch vehicles using ballistic missile technologies, which poses a grave threat to peace and security on the Korean Peninsula and beyond. The two leaders also reaffirmed their openness to holding talks with North Korea.
We both agree that DPRK must also address the serious human rights and humanitarian concerns of the international community, including the immediate resolution of the abduction issue. But you know, the Prime Minister has just spoken to the potential what his plans may mean, but I welcome the opportunity, we welcome the opportunity of our allies to initiate dialogue with the Democratic Republic of Korea.
In their joint statement, the two leaders also called on North Korea to return to dialogue without precondition. However, the North has stressed that any summit between Kim Jong-un and Kishida will be held without discussions on Japanese abductees and the denuclearization of the regime. They also expressed concerns over growing cooperation between North Korea and Russia, while calling for faithful enforcement of anti-Pyongyang sanctions, despite Moscow's veto of a UNSC resolution to extend the mandate of an expert panel monitoring sanctions implementation. During Wednesday's summit, the two leaders also announced an array of agreements, including upgrading their country's command and control structures, creating an air defense architecture between the U.S., Australia, and Japan, and deepening people-to-people exchanges. Biden also stressed the improved relations between Seoul and Tokyo, saying President Yoon Suk-yeol decided to heal all wounds and start a new chapter of friendship. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Hopes of the U.S. Central Bank lowering interest rates in the summer have been shut down, with recent meeting notes released by policymakers and March's consumer price report. Our Moon Hae-dan has the details.
U.S. Federal Reserve officials are concerned that inflation isn't coming down fast enough, and traders now expect rate cuts later in the year than originally forecast. On Wednesday, the Fed released the minutes from its latest meeting in March, which saw another freeze in the U.S. benchmark interest rates in the range of 5.25 and 5.5%. The meeting notes revealed a more pessimistic stance towards rate cuts from policymakers, citing uncertainties in being able to lower inflation towards the Fed's 2% target. Some participants reportedly predicted that longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, with others commenting that geopolitical risks could result in higher energy prices. After expectations that interest rates would be lowered in June, economists now predict that rate cuts could come in the Fed's meeting scheduled in September, given this latest commentary. The sentiment was supported by the U.S. Consumer Price Index for March announced by the Labor Department on the same day, showing that consumer prices rose 3.5% compared to the same month the year before. This is in fact higher than the 3.2% on-year rise seen in February. It's also the highest rise since last September, supporting Fed Chair Jerome Powell's comments that it's a sometimes bumpy road to bring inflation down. With the US CPI seeing 3 straight months of high readings, experts are saying that this might not just be businesses raising prices at the start of the year as economists had previously argued. Following the Fed's meeting notes, U.S. President Joe Biden acknowledged that while there could be delays in interest rate cuts, he stood by his prediction that these cuts could come by the end of the year. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Good morning. It's forecast to be a rainy day for the capital area in Gangwon-do province. The capital will see rain going away around lunchtime, while Gangwon-do could see rain through the late afternoon. Meanwhile, Jeolla-do provinces and Jeju will see passing rain during the day today. It really won't rain much, 1 to 5 millimeters of sprinkles in store, but brace for strong winds and thunderstorms if you're in Jeolla-do and nearby areas. Today's rain won't help much to ease the dryness in the air, with a dry advisory remaining in place for Seoul and surrounding areas. Wet clouds will just hide the sunshine behind the clouds today. Daytime highs will be similar to yesterday, hovering around 20 degrees Celsius in most parts of the country. But sunshine and warmth return tomorrow, and by Sunday, Seoul will see a high of 27 degrees. Meanwhile, rain is in the forecast for Jeju from tomorrow into Sunday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Friday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.